There is no doubt that 2026 is the year of the pirate. With Windrose already embarrassing AAA studios with their out-the-gate early access success, Corsair Cove, a pirate city builder published by Hooded Horse coming later this year, and of course the just announced remake of Assassin's Creed Black Flag. Without a doubt, the best Assassin's Creed game ever made. Yes, we pirate lovers are eating good this year, but why the remake of Black Flag? What is it about that particular game that has stayed with fans for so long that Ubisoft, famous for ignoring their fans and awful decision making, have actually made a good decision and listened to their fans and decided to remake it? It isn't even the highest selling game in the series. That title goes to Valhalla, which by the way was an awful game. So today we're going to sit down and together get to the bottom of why Black Flag, above any other game in the series, has stuck with players, is referenced to this day, what it got so right, and yes, what maybe didn't land so well. So come with me as we sail in search of the horizon and discuss why Black Flag is the best Assassin's Creed game ever made. First of all, there is a strange contradiction at the very heart of Black Flag, one that becomes more obvious the more you play it. Because the more time you put into the world, the more it begins to feel like the best Assassin's Creed game ever made, yes. And yet, at the exact same time, it barely resembles what Assassin's Creed was up until that point. What makes that contradiction so interesting isn't just that Black Flag breaks the formula, but that in breaking it, it created a game that stands a test of time uniquely. Is heralded as the greatest in the series, with the best mechanics, the best gameplay, and the best story, and is the first Assassin's Creed game to ever be remade. Yes, part of my argument for why it's the best Assassin's Creed game is the fact that Ubisoft has decided to remake it. Fight me. But first, let's go back in time a little. When Black Flag released, Assassin's Creed had already gone through its rise and consolidation as a series, evolving from the experimental ambition of Assassin's Creed into the character-driven brilliance of Assassin's Creed 2, where Ezio Auditore gave the franchise a sense of identity that extended far beyond mechanics and into something much more human and much more emotionally grounded. That momentum carried forward through Brotherhood and Revelations, but by the time the series reached Assassin's Creed 3, there was a growing sense that refinement had somehow, unsurprisingly perhaps, turned into repetition, and that even as the games became more technically impressive, they were somehow becoming less surprising, less interesting in the process. It's not that those games were bad, far from it, but they had settled into a rhythm that players could predict, a structure that guided you so clearly from one objective to the next that it rarely left space for the kind of unexpected moments that linger in your memory long after you've stopped playing. And it's within that context that Black Flag feels so unusual, because instead of doubling down on that structure, instead of iterating once again on what had already been proven sort of to work, it decided to follow a totally different experience to anything that had come before, both in terms of its features, but just as importantly, in its story. What replaces them isn't immediately obvious, because at first glance, Black Flag still looks like an Assassin's Creed game. It still has cities to explore, targets to eliminate, and a familiar set of tools at your disposal to do so. But the longer you play, the more you realize that those elements have been pushed to the edges of the game, and that the real center lies somewhere else entirely. Out on the open sea, where the structure loosens, the pacing changes, and the experience begins to feel less like a sequence of designed encounters and much more like something that you are discovering all for yourself. That shift towards the ocean fundamentally changes how the game feels to play, because it introduces a kind of freedom that previous entries only gestured towards without ever fully committing to. Sailing is not simply a means of getting from one mission to another, it becomes the connective tissue that binds everything together. And in doing so, it transforms the way you think about progression, about exploration, and about your place within the world itself. The act of moving through Black Flag's Caribbean is not guided in the same way early Assassin's Creed cities were, where rooftops and streets subtly directed your path towards your target. Instead, it asks you to make decisions constantly, to choose which ships to engage, which islands to explore, which risks are worth taking, and in that constant process of decision making, the game creates a sense of ownership over your experience that feels markedly different from simply following a prescribed route. It is not sense of agency, this feeling that you are not just progressing through content, but actively shaping your journey, that gives Black Flag so much of its lasting power. And yet, what makes that freedom meaningful rather than overwhelming is the way the game structures its systems so that they feed into one another, creating a loop that feels both natural and rewarding without ever becoming intrusive. Naval combat leads to resources, resources lead to upgrades, upgrades expand your capabilities, and those expanded capabilities open up new possibilities within the world, forming a cycle that reinforces itself without needing to constantly remind you that it exists. It is a design philosophy that prioritizes cohesion over excess, ensuring that every action has a purpose and that every system contributes to the same underlying experience. Within that framework, the Jackdaw emerges not just as a tool, but as an extension of the player, a physical, large representation of your progression and your presence within the greater pirating world. Something that evolves alongside you and reflects your choices in a way that previous Assassin's Creed games rarely achieved. Where earlier entries often tied progression to character abilities or equipment that felt abstracted from the world, Black Flag grounds that progression in something tangible, something that moves, fights, and exists within the same space as everything else. Also, I will say this, the ship combat combined with the good era of Assassin's Creed combat, not that HP-based shit we got and everything else, but the cinematic interwoven swordplay that combined with flintlocks made you feel like a legitimate badass on the high seas and allowed you to create so many cinematic moments in one game. Hell, even within one fight sometimes. We have not had an Assassin's Creed that to me played this well, felt this good, or looked that cinematic since. And the deeper Ubisoft plunged that series into bigger worlds and away from what made the series fun, the more interest in the series has dropped. For proof, look at Assassin's Creed Shadows, 6 million units sold versus Black Flag's 16 million units sold. How the mighty have fallen. I swear, if they fuck up the combat in the remake, I will riot. I mean, politely, obviously, as I'm British, maybe a strongly worded letter, or a video ranting about how shit Ubisoft are these days. One of the two, probably the video. My handwriting's awful. Getting back on point is within this world, this system-driven, player-shaped experience that Edward Kenway operates. And it's here that Black Flag takes its most significant narrative risk. Because Edward is not introduced as a hero, nor as someone with a clear moral compass or even a defined purpose, but rather as a man driven by immediate desires, by wealth, by opportunity, and by a restless need to escape the limitations of the life he is trying to leave behind. This absence of purpose is not a flaw in his character, but the foundation upon which his story is built, allowing the game to explore themes that earlier entries could only touch on in passing. As Edward moves through the world interacting with figures both historical and fictional, this too is something that the game delivers with a masterful stroke. Indeed, it is not until Black Sails coming out a year later that I would argue a piece of media so expertly blurred fictional storytelling with real-world historical figures. For those of you wondering, by the way, what the fuck is Black Sails? Did he just say Black Flag wrong? No, Black Sails is the best pirate piece of media ever, bar maybe Pirates of the Caribbean 1 to 3. It is a high-budget TV show set around Nassau, the pirate utopia at the golden age of piracy, and it is incredible. Go watch it now, thank me later. Anyway, I bring it up because like Black Flag, it blurs that line of you meeting real-life historical pirates in a grounded historical setting that is also fantasy. And Black Flag delivers this perfectly, as Kenway meets Blackbeard, Charles Vane, Calico Jack Rackham, Anne Bonny, Benjamin Hornigold, and many, many more. As you meet these characters and Kenway gets ingrained within the life of a buccaneer, the illusion of the pirate life begins to shift, revealing itself to be less about freedom and more about constant instability, less about independence and more about the fragile alliances that held it together. The Republic of Pirates, initially presented as a kind of anarchic utopia, slowly unravels under the weight of its own contradictions. And in watching that unraveling, Edward is forced to confront the reality that the life he has chosen does not offer the fulfillment he imagined, in fact, far from it. What makes this arc resonate is not simply the events that occur, but the way they are framed within the broader context of the game's systems and world. Because the same freedom that allows you to explore and conquer also mirrors the emptiness that Edward begins to feel as his journey progresses. The wealth you accumulate, the ships you defeat, the territories you claim, all contribute to a sense of achievement that is ultimately revealed to be transient, reinforcing the idea that freedom without direction can lead to a kind of deep dissatisfaction. This thematic cohesion, the alignment between gameplay and narrative, is something that Black Flag achieves with a subtlety that sets it apart not only from Assassin's Creed titles, but from many, many open-world games. It does not rely on overt messaging or heavy-handed storytelling to convey its ideas and themes, instead allowing the player to arrive at those conclusions organically through our own experiences within the world, and not because our hand is being held or a big orange light is suspended above something saying, "Plot over here." In contrast, the games that followed Black Flag often pursued scale as their primary goal. expanding the worlds and systems in ways that increased their scope but diluted their focus, creating experiences that were impressive visually in their breadth but less cohesive in their designs. Titles like Assassin's Creed Origins, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and Assassin's Creed Valhalla each brought their own innovations and strengths, but they often struggled to replicate the tightly interwoven systems and thematic clarity that made Black Flag feel so complete. What Black Flag ultimately demonstrates is that the strength of an open world does not lie in the sheer amount of content contained within it, but in the way that content is structured and connected, in how each element supports and enhances the others, and in how the player is allowed to engage with it on their own terms. It is this understanding, this commitment to cohesion and player-driven experience that elevates Black Flag beyond being simply a great entry in a long-running franchise and into something much more enduring. Because when you look back at it now, years removed from its release, what stands out is not any single feature or moment, but the way everything comes together to be a cohesive whole, to create a world that both feels expansive and intimate. It is a game that trusts the player to find their own path, to create their own stories, and to discover meaning, not through instructions, but through experience and narrative. And perhaps that is why it continues to resonate in a way that so few games manage. Because in stepping away from what Assassin's Creed was supposed to be, Black Flag found a way to capture what it always had the potential to become, delivering an experience that feels like a carefully constructed product and more like a place you once visited, a world you briefly lived in, and a journey that even after all this time, still lingers somewhere just beneath the surface. But I want to know what you guys think. Are you stoked for the remake of Assassin's Creed Black Flag? Do you fondly look back on sailing under the black in the Caribbean as Edward Kenway and bringing righteous vigor to the British Empire? I know I did, and I'm British. But also all the best pirates are British as well, so I feel like it was a British on British thing. Anyway, I don't know where I'm going with this anymore. Point being, I want to know what you think about Black Flag. I want to know what you think about the remake. And as always, until next time, something, something, something.